Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Inspirate Business, where we are here to inspire you, to empower you, and to enlighten you. And each week, we feature an influential, impactful, aspirational, and inspirational person who we can learn from. Maybe some insights that they share we can implement in our own lives. Wherever we are, whatever challenges we're going through, however we want to improve whatever businesses we're involved in. On the hot couch this week, I have none other than Sulieman Patel. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, Sulieman.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and peace upon you too, to all our viewers. And alhamdulillah, I'm very excited to be here. Alhamdulillah, we can try and share a little bit about information about ourselves. Again, you spoke about being inspirational, and we're certainly going to try and strive to try and motivate many of our young folk out there to inshallah be equal to or even better than us inshallah going forward.
Look, I know Sulieman as a very inspirational person. And I must relate a story that happened not too long ago. Sulieman and I used to travel on the Gau train to Pretoria. Sulieman was heading up the technology unit of public works. And we would travel on the bus. And this is the person that I got to know as Sulieman. We're traveling and there was a water burst pipe in the city of Tshwane. Now Sulieman was rushing to work and he sees this, and normally what would we do? We'd see these water burst pipe and just kind of ignore it. He makes a point of calling the council and making sure that gets fixed. This is the community person that I know, the activists that I know. Now, where did this all start from, Sulieman? Obviously, this has been some rearing. You grew up, I believe, out in the East Rand, right? Germiston.
Absolutely. So we grew up in a shanty town called Dikatole, and water was something so important to us, in that we never had the luxury of it in those particular areas. We had, fortunately, we lived in in one single yard, sharing one single ablution facility, door-to-door service until the age of 17, in terms of understanding and utilizing an outside latrine. And we understood the value of water when you had multiple families being able to use the conveniences on that particular side. Hot water used to basically come through from putting wood into the coal stove every single morning and lighting it up early, so there was enough hot water for us to go to school and bathe before we actually go to school. Those were the days, and I lived in that particular type of environment until 1987. And that's why today, when I basically go and look at whatever we've got, we say shukr, that we appreciate what we have. We appreciate every single drop of water today. And then also you see the reality is that we've got water shedding in many parts of the world. So, I'm a very passionate person that if you've got a mother that's got a baby and that baby doesn't have access to water, how do you answer to that mother? And being in government and coming from a government mainstream environment politically and also in the administration at multiple years, we have to be able to ensure that if you're a civil servant, you're a civil servant 24 hours, and you're not a civil servant only in what you were doing, but you're a civil servant in whichever way that you can become a caretaker to government. So if you have that philosophy, and if every one of our bureaucrats have that same philosophy, South Africa will be a very better place, and our people will really be able to prescribe to a level of service delivery that will be stupendous. But if we don't have that level of thinking where we want to go, unfortunately, we'll find ourselves. And again, one point on that is that if you look at the problems that we have with water today, every single drop lost is a precious loss. And from an Islamic point of view, water is like sadaqah. Giving water is so important. It's a charity, and that's what we should do. So it's just something that comes with the cause of life. So whether it's...
But what comes out very strongly is this, like you say, activism, your passion for serving. Now, where did this come from? I believe you come from a activist family. Your grandfather was quite involved in the Indian Congress.
Correct. So my marhum grandfather, alhamdulillah, Allah Ta'ala subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him Jannat al-Firdaus and rise the status of all our activists that have passed on and given us our freedom. Alhamdulillah. And yes, he was banned already in 1966. And he passed on after an episode of police brutality with the special branch in those days. And many of these are folk that are unknown. They're not the mainstream chaperones.
What was his name?
Sulieman Patel.
Right.
Sulieman Patel. And alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, but they were glorified with passing away on the night of Hajj. So, we must not judge and be judgmental. His view was always he wanted to go for Hajj. But I remember as a youngster, him telling us and telling us, and at that point, obviously, we had pretty long hair as youngsters, and he used to come and say, hippie or happies. And then he used to say that no one will be free unless everybody is free. And that's how we were orientated. Obviously, these were small words, but we never understood the value of this as young people or kids at that particular point in time. And then as we grew up, we started to understand the value of the word. So we had a very short time with him in there. By the time he passed on, I was only 8 years old. But it was a major influence in our life in terms of being able to show that we couldn't go and visit him. We couldn't go as a family to go and visit him because of the restrictions of apartheid banning and so forth. And that's when we started to understand this was the dynamics. And just before he passed away, he just got released from his banning order, and we went on a holiday trip with him to go and visit some of the extended family, and his intention thereafter was to go for Hajj, but it was never to be. Allah knows best. And then he actually passed on after that episode of brutality, and he passed away from brain hemorrhaging in hospital. But through that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed many of us the ability that we need to be khadims, we need to be serving the ummah. We always need to, we are brought onto this world not only for the 5 pillars of our deen. The critical thing is that when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed away, it was ummati, ummati, ummati. That means how do my people, my nation. And if we have that level of philosophy, I think the world will be a very, very different place.
Yeah, they talk today on business science and leadership around this concept now they've coined servant leadership.
Correct.
And if you think about it, what was the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? A servant leader. He served the ummah.
Absolutely.
You look at the principles of your grandfather. You look at all the icons in the struggle. What was it about? Never about personal gain. And I think this is something that's such a powerful lesson for us today. Everything is all about me. That's the pervasive culture that's been created the world over. And that's such a sad reality of the way we live in today.
Your heart is supposed to be controlling that nafs. But I think the question is that we need to overcome the nafs of the heart and replace it with ummati. And if every single person that in that pumping action of the heart, if we had to basically do it with those 4 chambers and how they work in unison, okay, each of them do not work within a nafsi. If they did, you'll not be living. They're working as a collaborative whole. Okay, and that's why I believe that if we take the term, and I've used it, and I've created this word called collaboration, where we need to take collaboration together with collectivism and bring it together. And if we can all have a collaboration of our life, where we can take Islam, which is there for us, which we live on our daily lives, and at the same time, you can take the secular world and bring it together. And through this collaboration of the two, you can achieve. But the most important thing is to be able to give meaning to your life. That if you pass on, how are we then going to answer? It's not only the word and legacy that you're going to give, but it's what have you been able to do like your Nabi, which has shown you the path and the way. Okay, he never only preached and came and talked about the Quran, right? He spoke about that you need to hold on to Allah's robes, and at the same time, the Quran was there. But more than that, he basically showed us a way of life in every single aspect, from the time of how you go to the bathroom to the time of death. So it was a complete ecosystem that our Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam showed us.
Complete way of life, right?
A 360-degree ecosystem, and that means we need to be able to prescribe to it. And I don't have the time at this point in time to see this level of fractionalism and factionalism that's coming and emanating in every single quarter. And if you all start castigating this ulama or that ulama, my principal philosophy is exactly on two things. When it comes down to halal, if it's from MJC, barakallah. If it's from Sana, barakallah. If it's from Iksa, barakallah. Alhamdulillah, with the blessings of Allah, follow it. If there's good being done by the Jamiyat, if the good is being done by MJC, if the good is being done by, take the good of everybody. And if we all work on that philosophy of life, then the calibration of trying to see where we want to go will be successful.
So Sulieman is talking some really powerful concepts here. I love this concept of this collaboration together with the collectivism, and bringing our Islamic ethos that we're so fortunate to have, which I think the world is lacking, that morality, that principles that has been espoused by our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and bringing that into the secular world with the progress that has been made technologically. And I know Sulieman is very passionate about technology, and we'll talk a little bit about your career and how you got into management consulting immediately after the break. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Inspirate Business. We are being enlightened by brother Sulieman Patel on the hot couch. Sulieman has been sharing with us his background, growing up in a pretty struggled environment, as most of us have from that generation, and have worked to a point now where, alhamdulillah, there's a lot more of abundance and so on. But in that, there's also challenges. Sulieman mentioned, the principle of servant leadership that has been taught to us by our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that his grandfather taught him, and that I know personally that Sulieman lives for, this servant leadership. Sadly, today, it has or is being eroded, and we need to bring this back. Now, you grew up then, and you schooled in Benoni, right? So you were quite active from a political, because I'm trying to connect to how you then eventually, which is a very interesting story of how you then get into running. If those that know, in 1998, sort of that first dispensation under democracy, Gauteng being the province was running what is called Blue IQ, I think it was called. And under the then Premier Tokyo Sekhwali, Sulieman was very instrumental in Blue IQ and running those projects. How did, I'm trying to connect the dots.
So connecting the dots is a very interesting thing. But I think going back to living in an informal settlement, right? We were 5 brothers together with my grandmother in one room.
Okay.
That's how we grew up. Okay, 4 plus the baby were obviously with my parents. And Allah Ta'ala grant them Jannati as well, inshallah. Because if it was not for them, we wouldn't be sitting here, right? And the one thing that they embraced as my father was a very brilliant man. And his knowledge view was he wanted to be a professional and grow, but it was never to be, because obviously my grandfather was under house arrest, and through that process he had to go and fend for the family as the eldest had been. So he was forced to leave school, and sadly, thereafter we actually saw the breakup of the family. My aunt had to go to London, and she's never come back. And through the pain of those days, with understanding and living with my grandfather, where he could not see his daughters married, even if he said lock me in chains and do it, that they talk about imprinting at a young age. That was imprinted in my mind and in my psyche. I was the eldest of the brood at that particular point in time, and it was imprinted because because by the time my grandfather passed away, I was 8 years old, and I was already starting to understand this philosophy of life that he could not understand and seek the freedom that he wanted. So prior to him passing away, we went to the trip, and on this particular trip that he took us through, which was to go and see the external family and then to go for Hajj. Unfortunately, he never made that Hajj, but he was granted the death on the night of Hajj. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised his status and everybody else.
Ameen.
And when you understand that few years of his imprinting on our life, it left an indelible ink imprinted across my brain. That we had to be able to do something differently. Living in a squatter camp where we had rivers of sewage flowing on either side of the road, getting onto a bus at 20 to 7 in the mornings to go to a secondary school in Benoni, because we were not allowed to use any schools or facilities in Germiston. We had a high school just about a kilometer away, which we could not go to. So we had to go into buses and be transported all the way.
You went to William Hills.
William Hills, right, that's right. We went to first, which was the old William Hills, and then the new William Hills, and we went in buses. And as we drove through Boksburg and parts of Benoni, and we saw all these different schools, these different students with all their different amenities, because you were sitting at a high level on the bus. You could actually walk through and see their stadiums, see what they've had, and you going into a very, very different type of the old Bantustan type of schooling. So am I a product of Bantustan education? The answer is yes. But am I very proud of it? The answer is yes. Because the teachers that we had at that point, one of them was obviously Jay Naidu, minister, was my history teacher. So he was
a teacher in Benoni?
In William Hills, yes. Okay, Minister Jay Naidu was a teacher at William Hills. He was my one of my school teachers. So we had a very different lesson of history, I can tell you, compared to that. So we had some very, very good coaching from our teachers. That there were some very good teachers that gave us a very different level of knowledge and instill our knowledge. And although it was Bantu-based education or House of Delegates-based education, we had strict discipline. I mean, I remember Marhum, our principal Mr. Moideen, hitting us in matric for getting Afrikaans spelling wrong. We used to get stressed.
But there was that strong discipline, right?
That strong discipline. Getting hiding in my matric year for getting 18 out of 25 in Afrikaans. I'll never forget that. Getting caned. So this was the level of discipline that we had. But we appreciate what our teachers did for us. I remember our teacher Hilaal Patel, who was with us at Gauteng, the Department of Education, also being one of our teachers and our maths teachers, and really trying to get us to strive for the best that we can be to overcome these hurdles. And we never appreciated it as young people, but then we got to know that this discipline was they were sacrificing because they were traveling from all over.
I want to say Benoni was a hotbed of activism, right? I mean, the Kachalias came from there as well.
Absolutely.
Azar,
Actonville, the whole Actonville hotspot.
I didn't know that's something that I learned now about Jay Naidu. I don't think many people know that.
Correct.
That he was
and very interestingly enough, you would find that the activism in William Hills, but that was just, remember, we were in that movement that was just where the birth of the UDF was coming into being. So that 82, 83, 84 period, that's when the UDF was coming up into its own, was being launched as an alternative force. That's when we were having the boycotts in the schools.
It must have been very tough in that time with the unrest. I mean, there was this whole the sanctions era and South Africa going to the uncertainty.
And then going into this area. But also at the same time, I think while we had the secular side, we also had a very, very good Islamic knowledge ethos coming through from Madrasa Quwwatul Islam, which gave the birth to some of our Darul Ulums today. Okay, so if you look at, for example, Maulana Abdul Hamid, currently from in Azadville, comes through from Germiston. If you take Maulana Ayub Kachwi, who's a Jamiatul Ulama, really, really gained knowledge. So I am so grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us this level of educators who instilled both the Islamic philosophy in it, who gave us the Islamic theology in it, and these teachers that came in and gave us an ecosystem of education. We must be so proud of that.
What I want to understand is, you took these principles. Now, how did you end up, like I said, in Gauteng at the Premier's office?
So it was just naturally the activism in us.
Right.
Because by the time I was again at the age of, so remember, we got thrown out from Pageview. All right, that was originally where we were living. Because my grandfather was on banning orders, we couldn't all live in Germiston at that point. So that my folks then moved to Pageview, or Fitas, as we know it, or Freedom. So we used to live on 16th Street. We lived in 21st Street, and then obviously from there, when my grandfather passed on, my grandmother, who was very difficult. She didn't want to leave that home, so we then had to leave Freedom and then basically move back into Germiston and stay in Germiston. And when we stayed there, we obviously saw this level of oppression. This is a level of oppression where, while we were there, we could not even go to a beautiful lake called Victoria Lake across from there. We could only stand on the outskirts. And even if you're on the outskirts of the lake, the police used to come and push you away. I remember an incident in the park that we were sitting in the park one day, and while we were playing there, and we just got to the park, and then the police came, and I remember them with those straps, with the gun on this side here, and they went up to my father and spoke to my father. And next minute, my father comes and tells us to get into the car. And obviously, as youngsters, we obviously said, "But we just got here. Why are you taking us away?" And I remember that incident vividly. And we were but then my father, we refused to go. So my father then hit us and put us into the car, and we went away. And in the car, while we were sort of like crying and so forth, you could see the hurt in your parents' eyes on that particular level. And I think these were all the imprinting of episodes that started to leave and make us understand that, listen, that we are not free. We are not equal. Something is not gelling here in terms of this. Going to different schools, when there's a school here, going to these type of traveling, everybody else is not going through that same level of time. We were so blessed that I could also see that we had certain ulama traveling from Fortsburg by bicycle coming to teach us. And we used to have Echo-wise fish and chips on every now and again when these ulama used to bring it to us. And I started to understand that, listen, there's this beauty that's coming in where we're trying to be instilled with knowledge, with domain knowledge, with deen in terms of how we should practice it. And it's a little bit more than just to look after myself. I don't want to be the 99.9% in the world that's just going to be the bucket of sand. As Stephen Covey says, 99.9% of the world will be in the sand. There's only going to be 1% or more that's going to be the rocks. So we need to be those and see, how can I make a rock out of my life? And it doesn't mean that I'm living in a gutter that I have to stay in a gutter. I have to get out of it. And as the eldest, how do I basically try and get out and showcase and move on my own, and to try and develop on my own and move with it? And we did not have, whereas many of the different families were involved in business and doing business and getting involved with that, here was a family involved very much in activism, fighting for the rights and justice and trying to basically do that. So I would say 90% of mainstream Indian communities were purely there for their own business and basically doing it and getting on with their life, but living the lives of the stand. They will live, they will born, they'll have children, they'll make money, and they will die away, but there'll be no legacy to leave.
You speak about something that's so powerful from an Islamic perspective, and I think that's the tenet of Islam, is this justice, that we need to be standing up for what is right, even if it really has to challenge our existence. And again, we contrast that rearing. We spoke earlier about how the principles of servant leadership. Now we talk of justice, and you talk of today how that is being lost. I mean, today we find leaders, Islamic leaders, sacrifice or let go of that concept of justice. You talked of your grandfather saying that you cannot be free until everyone is free. Nelson Mandela mentioned that about the Palestinians. And we're not free until the Palestinians are free. So let's talk after the break. We already come. I mean, it's been quite an intriguing session. As Sulieman has shared so much of his experiences and principles and ethos. I think that's so important. After the break, we'll explore further. Welcome back to Inspirate Business, where we're here to inspire you, to empower you, and to enlighten you. And have we been enlightened by Brother Sulieman Patel as he shares with us his experiences growing up as a young man, being reared by his grandfather, who was banned at the time, involved in the struggle against apartheid. Sulieman grew up in a very, very humble abode, and but principles that I think are being lost in today's world. Principles of servant leadership, principles of justice. These sadly today are being eroded. But what I find amazing through your story, Sulieman, is that despite the struggles, despite the minimal material environment, and the thing is, today there are still so many. I mean, you spoke about growing up with pit latrines, I mean, this was what, 40 years ago now. Today, we still challenged with that same issue. There are people right now in South Africa that are dealing with pit latrines. Now, the lessons I'm trying to take, that here was somebody that came out of all this quagmire, comes out of it, and alhamdulillah gets involved in so many projects. I mean, some huge projects, and continuing to do so as a management consultant, as a business consultant, so many government projects and IT projects that you've been involved with. What are the lessons for our people today that may be going through the same challenge, maybe in a different context, but that are going through those challenges? How do you traverse this? How are you able to transcend from that environment to being where you are today?
So is it a great disappointment that as an ANC activist, that you see an ANC in free fall like it is today? The answer is absolutely yes.
Right.
And can we be disappointed about it? And can we mope about it? The answer is no. Because I think we've seen from all liberation movements that once people become liberated, then unfortunately the liberation of the pocket becomes a paramount player. Okay, because in politics, it's comprised of two words by its very nature, and we can't be naive about it. The one is power, and the second is wealth. They are synonymous with each other. They work in that particular ecosystem. The question is, how do you manage, the attraction of the power and the wealth? Okay, and corruption doesn't happen only because you've got a corrupt politician. It's because you've got somebody on the outside that's willing to corrupt as well. So the person sitting at the braai can castigate stones and throw everything at everybody else and says, that this government is corrupt, etc. But if you look at his business, it's all thriving on tenders that's coming through from basically giving or doing nefarious deals with the state. So the two of them are there. So the question is, how do you bring about a balance between that particular two? All right. And I think that's the interesting philosophy. So whether you take the US model today, where the corruption is just a lot more smarter, right? So you have various corporate companies that front for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and you'll see premiers, secretaries of state coming from these companies into them and vice versa, and so forth. And it's well entrenched. The lobby system.
Given the term, you just want to say the term lobbying, right?
The lobbying term. You've got professional lobbyist, which is such a nice name, professional lobbyist. But it's literally somebody going bribing and corrupting and telling somebody that this is what we want and why. Whether it's the gun lobby, whether it's whatever, and it's happening in one would regard or one would want to view as the greatest democracy in the world, being the US as an example. That's on your left-hand side. But the reality is this, it's how do you create that balance? So it was expected that what we would see, that from the earlier years where everybody was, when we served under the Mariba's government, when I served under three different premiers in the office of the premier in Gauteng in the earlier years, it was a very different ballgame. Never would I conceive that I would be playing golf on the day of business. Never would I conceive that I would have to pay, that I would basically expect the lunch or anything coming through from a vendor. We would pay for it out of our own pocket to prevent that level of corruption. That was the level of ethics and ethos that we had. But that came through the symbolism of being able to be true ANC cadre in terms of what we wanted to do. Coming through and part of that was bedded down by being in the civic movement at that particular point in time. Because remember the Civic Association of Southern Transvaal that was there, some of our stalwarts today, for example, Keskubadia was in cast, and these were all icons that were slightly older than us, but we regaled them as the young Turks at that particular point in time. And we had that same philosophy of life. Nazirari from ex-Sanral, all of them were basically all part and involved in the civic structure. And as youngsters, we looked up to them because we were in the early 20s, they were in the in the early 30s, so we had the 10-year gap, and they were there to sort of mentor us through this particular process. So we had a really good tutelage team at an educational level, and at the political level, we also had some very good tutelage through the mentorship that these folks gave us. Plan Act from Yeovil, some very good activists that were there to help us through some of these different processes, and everything was about honesty and integrity. But those first 5 years was all about servitude. How do we basically go and work on selfless service, not self-service. Selfless service was the key domain and actor at that point. But I think the cancer and the rot started in 2000 when we saw selfless service change to self-service in the state. Okay, so the self-service then became the modus operandi of most of the institutional individuals. And this was now coming in from higher levels because that first 5 years, we had already done most of it. We brought about the stabilization. I mean, I remember the old Transvaal provincial administration. We had to make sure that we had to pay salaries as the IT team. We had to make sure that we had to be able to go and provide the level of services to the whole of the old Transvaal while you had this breakup taking place. And as a young team, many of these people refused to report into me in Pretoria from the old.
Well, these were the old Afrikaans,
the old Transvaal provincial administration guys. There was 125 people in the IT team. The tea lady and the driver were black. The rest were all white. Many of those folks refused to report to us, and many of them resigned. But we relocated the seat of government from Pretoria into Johannesburg. We set it up. We were, as I remember, as directors, we were carrying routers, we were carrying boxes, etc., to make this thing work. Today, nobody would do that. Nobody could be. It was going beyond the call of duty. We were working in the evenings. Many of our students or youngsters were going for educational training on how to configure Cisco routers, but it was something new. We took young cadre from Joburg, Durban, Cape Town, and we went and ran interviews in those areas, and we took youngsters, bringing them into the system, and then many of them did not do. They were not aware of how to configure routers, configure systems, configure servers. So while they went for the training and they still didn't know, on Saturday I used to go and help them and teach them how to basically go and configure that, because I can't afford for them to look bad in terms of that they can't do this. And that was the love that we had to be able to build together.
I want to say something. You know, what you're sharing with us is so powerful because it's a blueprint of what, if we just look at what is happening right now, one of the biggest issues is these blackouts, right? The load shedding. And now the minister, Pravin Gordhan, has just come out saying that we're trying to bring back this whole mentorship principle, bring back the skills back into Eskom. And what you're talking about is this whole mentorship program. You had mentors that taught you not only the skills, but also that of integrity, that moral ethics, people that you could look up to. Now, how do we bring this back? Because firstly, there's such a despair. And you who's given your life, right, for the social justice, and see what's happening at the moment with things breaking down, with all this corruption. Let me first ask you this: is there hope? Right.
So the reality is this for me, that if you have to ask me today that do I want my children to stay in South Africa, the answer is no. No. In the last few weeks, virtually every week, one of my friends that I knew very well, and these were all professionals like CAs, engineers, etc. Many of them are leaving the country. Okay, and I'm not talking white friends. I'm talking Indian friends. I'm talking black friends that are leaving the country. Okay, so that is how bad it is at this particular point in time. And one basically understands that when you basically have to go and put a generator on, which was never possible. I'm going back 40 years ago when I used to light the candle when the power used to go up, but then I blamed apartheid for it. I can't blame apartheid for it. Okay, I'm saying we were in power. I was in power. Okay, never mind, I was not a president or the premier, but I was in power. And why did we basically allow this to happen? All right. And so the reality is, it's a stark thing when you're going to put that generator on and have to deal with the carbon monoxide that's basically coming through from that gen set at home, and you say that, can my children afford this? But my worry is even one step further, that knowing that how bad things have gone in terms of the water space, in terms of all these different domains, because I played a role in multiple areas of trying to turn around government or advising government at different levels. And I've seen the caliber of cadre that we basically have in place, and I was completely shocked. When I go back to the 90s, the early 1994 to 2000, and you see the level of caliber of the cadre that we had, that was sitting in there with the level of capability that we had and the competency level of the people that we have, and I mentioned some of them in my preamble. Look at that level of class of people, ethics, ethos, and so forth, versus what we have now. And it's chalk and cheese. Okay, so let me be very, very clear, and I'll challenge anybody on this particular point. You will not take a heart surgeon who just qualifies out of med school and tell him to go and start fixing your pump. right? You want to make sure that you will not use a plumber. Why? Because you know you're dead. If you're going to use somebody that's coming out and just basically has not done his first operation, I'll be very, very wary that if there isn't a mentor next to him to help me operate on that heart to be able to do it. The first qualification I would look at is not your maths and whatever. How many times have you been able to do a heart transplant or open heart surgery? That's the first key cardinal question you're going to do, right?
Yeah. So look, we come to the end of the segment. It's on a very high note, a very intense note that we live in it at. I think what Sulieman is sharing with us also is a reality check. It's a cold smack also. I mean, we talk on the show a lot about hope, a lot about, and I think that as Muslims also we taught, the Prophet ﷺ always taught us that no matter whatever your challenges are, always have hope. But there are realities in this country, and as an activist that gave your life to see a better life for South Africans. I mean, you've out of your own admission are saying that you failed, right? Having been involved in government. We have to take accountability. So we're going to come to the last segment after the break, and then let's explore now what can we do differently if we can do something differently. Catch you immediately after the break. Welcome back to Inspirate Business. We have Sulieman Patel, who has been sharing with us his journey as an activist, as a servant leader, having been reared by his late grandfather. May Allah grant him Jannatul Firdaus. These principles of servant leadership, of social justice. And he made quite a bold statement. Sulieman was involved in various government projects and so on. And he's saying as activists, as people that were involved in government, we have to take accountability for the failures. And that's a good start. The fact that, and I think most people can't do that. And I think maybe that is something that we can start off with in this last segment where, we always talk about hope and, because that is an Islamic principle. We must always be positive. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ went through major challenges, personal, structural, economic, social, yet became the leader of the world, a revolution par anything that the world has ever seen. So I always hold on to that and say that despite all the despair in the world that we see, and in South Africa particularly, surely we can change the trajectory. I know you did say that if it was up to you and you have your children, you would let them leave the country. A lot of your friends, including whites, blacks, Indians, colors, are leaving the country. That is a reality. But we are specifically on the continent in South Africa. What can we leave with our viewers in this segment of practical ways that we can do things differently, if we can do things differently?
So I think on that last point where I said that you always want an experienced heart surgeon to be able to operate on your heart. And the question is, this is the biggest mistake the state is doing at the moment. And the biggest mistake that's been regurgitated. In this week, I heard a professor on 702 talking the same thing, that you just need an engineer and he'll be able to fix Eskom. That's absolute garbage in my point of view, with all due respect to the man. Okay, you cannot take people today and give them the theory and ask them to basically go and implement. You need to be able to bring the experiential skills in. Why is it that take a bank, for example, you can have a young BCom graduate that will cost them 30,000 rand. But why do they have the BCom graduates that they're paying 100,000 rand and still 30 or
But now isn't Praveen now doing that now with Eskom, right? So there's one example. He's now saying, well, he just made the statement out that bringing back, even from the solidarity movement, bringing all these experience, skills, right? Even coming as mentors, and I think they now owned it down to 100 top just to fix Eskom, right? So taking these experiences that have been lost. So if we take it to department, right? I heard this week as well, Dr. Sulieman talking about how to fix up the municipalities, saying that if there's, I think there's 267 or something municipalities.
There's 278, 250.
Right. So saying if you need like 10 core skills there, management skills, and we bring them in. and private sector brings these skills, we put them in there, and then you run it for 3 years and then transfer it back to government.
No.
So are these practical solutions?
No, guys. Sometimes our guys must be very careful when they talk. I've been a bureaucrat. And I've been a political person. So I've been in council as a politician, and I understand local government backwards in this country. Provincial government and national government, I understand it backwards. And both in a political role and as an administrator. Okay. The reality is this: every single person in government is a cog, and those cogs need to work together to be able to do it. You can't bring one single cog on the top and be able to do it and say change. When we went into institutions like Public Works to try and turn them around, okay, you had a whole host of staff that were inside there. But on the one side, you were on the 7th floor giving the instruction. Then you ran down to the 6th floor to execute the instruction. Then you came down to the 5th floor to make sure that it is done. Because the competencies and levels of the individuals were not there. We had some very, very good people, but badly managed, badly mentored. Okay, why is the biggest failure of the state happening at the moment? In that, when I remember very, very early being at Standard Bank, that if anything you did not know in your particular job role or that was different, there was a cupboard. You used to go to that cupboard and they used to have something there called standing instructions to officers. You pick out that particular document, and every single thing that you are supposed to do in your job was written in that document end to end for a day, for a week, for a month. And that means even if you were not there, somebody else could come in and take that standard operating procedure or that standard instructions and be able to do it. That does not exist in 99% of our state departments today. It does not exist.
So what they call that intellectual
domain,
memory, that organizational memory is not there.
Correct. So that standing instructions today has metamorphosed into the intranets in the bank, into those domain knowledge. Working for IBM, I remember very clearly that we used to have something called the Prof system. We used to have Hogan as a system. We used to have multiple systems whereby we used to go and collect information and domain knowledge across the world that we could go and pick up and be able to do it. So even when I was working for IBM, we were connecting computer systems from all over the world. Okay, but if I needed information, there were sources that I could go to. There was a network. There were steps that you could follow to be able to do it. Those do not exist in 99% of state departments today. So
right,
you can't
So now 2002, right? 2002, we win awards. ESCOM wins a global award. SARS wins global awards. Yes, we understand there's been a breakdown of these institutes, right? Through corruption, through that whole, what they call the lost decade and so on. The political issues that happened, which has all been revealed now in the Zondo Commission. The question now is, can we, the fact that we lost now, let's say 20 years, right? Can we go back or can we catapult ourselves back to those levels that those wonderful years between 94 and say 2001, 2002. Can we bring that back through what you are now suggesting?
Absolutely. I mean, is there enough money in the state in budgets? Absolutely. 100%. And I concur with Dr. Sulieman on that point. There's enough money. But if you've got the money, but you don't have the know-it-all on how to do it or the way-it-all on how it needs to be applied, that's the circus that we see today, right? So that means there's going to have to be mentorship that needs to be taken place on different level. There's going to have to be re-engineering that's going to be different. Because if you've got somebody that's involved in 20 years of corruption, you can't reverse it overnight. If you've got somebody that says, every time I need to do a deal and I need to get my 10% or my 15% ka-chink on that one, how do I do it? Even if you basically go and change those 100 heads and you expect that to dissipate, it's not.
The culture has to change.
You need to be able to go in and be able to take and bring about a re-engineering and transformational exercise at every single level. That means you need to take those retirees and bring them in, and you need to take that. I wouldn't want to call them retirees. I want to say that those are the domain experts of wisdom. We need to take those domain experts of wisdom, bring them back in and say, how do we basically fix them? But you cannot bring them in to run parallel to this particular system. It's not going to work. You are going to have to bring them in institutionally at the level of executive head where they've got command, control, and management responsibility to then be able to take on the responsibility to change. Because you can advise all you want, but the bureaucrat can accept it or reject it. The one thing I've learned in some of the turnaround projects in the state, where we went in and we were embedded in terms of active turnaround projects to bring about the change and transformation, we achieved at stupendously. We could take entities that were literally collapsing and bring them back onto the verge within 2 to 3 years, back onto a level of stabilization and moving onwards. Why? Because we were in control. We could effect control. We could have management control. We could assert. If there are certain people that need to be suspended, if there are certain people that were brought out of the system, if there were certain people that we just abruptly moved out of the system so they don't become obstacles, we had that. But we had the sponsorship of the DG, we had the sponsorship of the minister, and we had the will from the top. So it could easily be done. But now if you bring in the advisors, which have been in multiple roles as well, useless. It has not brought about the change that you want. Because all you can go to minister, we found this, and this, and this is how we believe it must be changed. But who needs to change it? It needs to go to the DG. The DG needs to give it to the Deputy Director General, the Director General to the Chief Director, to the Director, and downwards. And if that will is not there, they don't have to accept it. So if that doesn't change, what's the sense? So you can have the best of advisors coming in, whether it's in ESCOM or not, it's not going to work. So the way to be able to do this is you're going to have to bring guys that are prepared to roll up their hands. They will have to come into the management echelon. Those people that are acting as stewards of obstacles of destruction, because that's what they're doing. We need to move them out of the system. We need to tell the unions, please hang ten a little bit. We're trying to fix and let's not let the ship go down. We understand that there's a role to play. Give them their salaries. Let them do whatever they want to. Let's put them aside. And that's what I did successfully. And once we do that, we then basically get the operations, etc. done. These folks that are on the outside, those obstacles, you deal with them separately. If you're going to try and deal with the obstacles, 4 years or 5 years of your life, it's going to go. It's impossible.
And the sad part about it is
impossible to fire somebody.
I don't think this country has that 4 to 5 years. Because we just heard now at one of at Comrade Maroon Jesse Duarte's memorial, ex-President Thabo Mbeki speaking about the Arab Spring that can happen in South Africa.
The have-nots are going to come against us.
Yes. We don't have that time anymore.
The have-nots are going to rise. There is no doubt in my mind that is a reality. Okay, because we have got the kindling that just needs a match. July last year was an indication of it. And the people that will be affected the most will be those in the Black Belt area. The colored Indian and the Black Township people will be the recipients of that.
And I think we're operating in a global environment also. I mean, there's talks of the world economy going into recession. So that impacts us even further.
Correct.
And we have such a high Gini coefficient, with this have-nots of such a large amount, unemployment of such a heavy amount. So we have to be doing things differently. You've given us, there's a contrast here, and I think that's the beauty of our religion as well. And again, Sulieman has shared with us his principles of social justice, and you can see that exude from you, this passion. You did mention, obviously, there's a lot of people that are disillusioned and will leave, right? We're in a global village. And yes, of course, go to greener pastures, opportunities in Dubai and other places of the world. But we're here, and we have to make a difference whilst we are here. That's incumbent upon us as Muslims as well. And you've given us such a beautiful blueprint, a pragmatic blueprint, not just waffle. Advisors giving us a document. We know as consultants, you can write documents upon documents upon documents, and they just,
if there's no injection,
become file 13, right? You mentioned something so powerful, that analogy of rolling up your sleeves, getting down to making things. And we don't have the liberty of time. We have to be doing things now. And so you need that assertiveness, is what you said. That assertive, I think that's a strong word that you used. So yes, there's that servant leadership, because it's not about us, it's about our generations to come. And then being assertive, you have to be able to be a little bit dictatorial, if you may call it that, in a sense that you have to shake up the system.
You have to look at a level of autocracy.
Yes.
And guess what? When you do that, you'll find that there's gems in there. And what we did, in one department I don't want to mention, out of that we found that literally there was maybe about 17% people of the work were fit for purpose. All right? 17% of the workforce was fit for purpose. And this is like 110 workforce.
Wow.
Okay, in some of them, so that were fit for purpose, that could do the stuff. But you use that 17%, okay, to grow that level of services and delivery, and you bring that up. And with that, you'll see some of the others that automatically will want to basically fall into the flow. That balance of the 50 or 60% are just going to sit and park and try to do it on. And the turnaround is very, very clear. Push them aside, leave them out of your way, and get on with the job in terms of being able to do that. And if you can achieve that,
I hope we've come to the end of the show. I hope those that are listening, and I know we have a large viewership that are, business leaders, that are would-be entrepreneurs, that are current entrepreneurs, that are those wanting to get involved, that are government, leaders, political leaders. This is so refreshing, and it is the likes of Sulieman and that type of cadre leadership that has been lost, that needs to be brought back into our work that we need to do, whether it is the SOEs, whether it is municipalities, national departments, and we can do it. So, Sulieman, just in closing, if people want to get hold of you, are you on social media, or how can they get hold of you?
So social media is my bane.
Right.
For two reasons.
Right.
That if you leave a digital footprint, you can't delete it. Ever.
Right. Got you. Right.
So I just don't have the time for that. And with the amount of issues that we have at this particular point in time, we don't have the time to be frivolous and to be basically be doing it.
Got you.
So the reality is this, that I would take a call or I would take an email, which would be my preferable way.
Okay, but so your details will be on the Inspirate social media page. We are still using social media. We'll have Sulieman's details there. Lean to Sulieman. I know, for example, myself personally, he's been quite a mentor for me. And just exuding this passion and this real care to make our country a better place, to make our continent a better place, and to play a meaningful role in the global ecosystem, which we can do.
Inshallah.
So thank you so much. For me, it was absolutely insightful. I think it wasn't just waxing lyrical about all the great stuff. There was some pragmatic and some cold reality that was poured in this last hour from Sulieman about our current state of our country, of the culture that is pervasive. Can we change it? Sulieman has given us a blueprint. Let's use it. Let's implement it. Let's roll up our sleeves and make this country a better place. On that note, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.